Well, good afternoon or good morning if it applies. Welcome to Open Classroom. I'm Janet Gillow, the Director of Professional Development for the Brown School here at Washington University in St. Louis, and I am so happy that you're here with us for today's program. For those of you that are joining us here on the Zoom webinar, you likely know this about the format, but I do want to clarify that we can't see or hear the audience. We also can't call on raised hands. The Q&A feature is enabled. That's on your toolbar at the bottom. And there will be a time to bring in the questions and concerns of the audience into this conversation. So if something occurs to you as we go, please don't be shy. We would love to know what's on your mind. Before we get started, I just want to share Open Classroom is an initiative of the Brown School that we began at the start of the pandemic. Throughout it, we've had a chance to do nearly 200 programs so far. And today's program is exciting for us because it's new partners that we've not worked with previously. New partners probably means new people in the audience who may not have connected with us before. So I just want to make sure you're aware, Open Classroom is a free resource. However you found us and wherever you are, we hope that you will be back. And to that end, coming up soon, we're going to be back on the air tomorrow. Tomorrow is Transgender Day of Visibility, and we have a great panel specifically focused on supporting trans youth. And then on Monday, April the 4th, we're partnering with Influencing Social Policy to deliver a program on deconstructing inclusion beyond a seat at the table. So lots of things going on here, and you are welcome for any and all of it. And today we have something truly amazing. So I'm going to introduce our guest moderator today. Susan Stith is Vice President of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Civic Affairs and Corporate Responsibility at Cigna, also the Executive Director of the Cigna Foundation. In these roles, Susan is responsible for shaping and steering Cigna's enterprise-wide equity initiatives, philanthropic investments, and community outreach programs. We're honored to be partnering with her, and it's my pleasure to turn the microphone over to her as today's moderator.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, everyone who's here with us today. I have to tell you, I am so excited, one, about the work that you've done and the fact that you've done 200 programs. And I'm equally excited about this esteemed panel. You're in for a ride, so just get ready. You're in for a ride. So before we get started, let's talk about what it is, what our theme is. It's called Leveraging the Collective, a commitment to advancing DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in our communities. You know, obviously, we all know that we live in a world that's complex. There's a lot of tension and stress that we're all experiencing today more than ever. And when we come to work, or we are in our communities, or when we're at school, that doesn't go away. And what this discussion is about is how do we openly have those conversations and address that? Because that's the reality of the world that we're in. This is going to be an open dialogue. And as I said, get ready, get ready. They are going to be an amazing group. The goal is for us, though, to be able to use our voice and our voices just as they will in order to advance these conversations by recognizing something that's very fundamental. Diversity and equity and inclusion is not just something that's competitive in the workplace and that we need in the workplace. We have to talk about this in our communities. It's a broader societal discussion. And these are discussions that we may not have had 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and certainly not 15 years ago. The reality is that there is an expectation in the community and in our workplaces that we have these conversations. So today, it's important for individuals to have a voice, and we will hear these voices today. We want to talk about some of the barriers that are in diversity, equity, and inclusion that we're all experiencing. And then there's this concept called collective impact, which is this thing, an intentional way of working together in order to solve complex problems. That means coming together, not working individually, not in your silo, coming together. And so I'm going to let the speakers introduce themselves, but I can tell you that today you have individuals that come from academia, that come from medical, healthcare, education. That's intentional because what we talk about is all collective and it's all working together. That's the power of the community. And then the one last question that I want to make sure that we address is, and I want everybody to think about it, how do you create space for everyone without alienating anyone? That's a big question right now. So I want us to think about it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists. I want them to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with you, Michellene, then we're going to go to Forrest, and then we're going to go to Mary. And each of you have 1 to 2 minutes each to introduce yourselves.
Well, thank you so much. It is always an incredible opportunity to be with individuals who are this brilliant, doing this much great work. And anywhere the Honorable Susan Stith asked me to show up, I'm just going to come. I'm showing up. Good day, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Michellene Davis, and I am the president and CEO of National Medical Fellowships. National Medical Fellowships is one of the first diversity organizations in the continental United States. We were founded back in 1946, and we are one of the sole organizations that literally advances health equity at the intersection of the health-wealth gap. We ensure that there are more Black and Brown, Indigenous persons of color who are underrepresented in medicine, actually going into medicine, and then we swoop in around them and ensure that they have the financial and the communal supports to make it through. I come here from large-scale academic medical center system and also a career in government where I served as a state treasurer, a chief policy counsel, and a variety of other entities in the state, including the CEO of a lottery. So it was super fun. But I am more excited now. I feel like I hit the lottery today to be here with this particular panel. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Michellene. Forrest.
I think I'm off mute now. Thank you, Susan, and thank you for being amongst this great group of just very brilliant and smart people. I'm Forrest Harper. I am humbly so the 6th president and CEO of Inroads, the nation's largest nonprofit that focuses on leadership development and career development for underrepresented students throughout our nation. Inroads has been around for 52 years, and we were born out of the March on Washington, when our founder focused on how do we make sure there's a pathway for opportunities for underrepresented students getting into corporate America and also getting into entrepreneurship. One of those paths is healthcare, and the other path is social opportunities. I started my career out in healthcare in the pharmaceutical industry. I spent almost 30 years at Pfizer watching some of the most innovative products that were produced to either extend life or save life. So I'm very passionate about the area of health in our communities, as Susan just talked about DEI in that area. But today, our focus is preparing the next talented workforce, leaving the community, going into these careers. And as we say, there is no wealth without your health. So I'm very excited to be a part of what we're going to talk about today as we bring that to our communities.
Perfect. Thank you, Forrest. And then Mary, last but not least.
So good afternoon, everyone. I am Mary McKay, and I am the Vice-Provost for Interdisciplinary Initiatives at Washington University here in St. Louis. I am just so in awe of our panelists. So thanks for letting me join and humbly contribute to this discussion. My background is in higher ed. My portfolio excuse me, is really meant to catalyze our university's strategic plan and to support the advancement of our university over the next decade. Equity, diversity, inclusion is a core value of that strategic plan. That plan also truly rests on strong partnerships across disciplines, but also with our partners in the community. So I'm particularly passionate about connecting platforms like ours in higher ed to really positive transformation and impact in our community. Prior to this, I was the Dean of the Brown School. That's how I met you, Susan, and this esteemed panel. The Brown School houses graduate education in social work, public health, and social policy. So that school is an incredibly special opportunity to advance the next set of leaders that grounds their work in equity. And I'm particularly proud of the Brown School Strategic Plan, Advancing Equity 2030. So I'll stop there, except to say, Susan, thanks for bringing us together. And I really am looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. And so I'm actually going to let you continue, but I'm going to start with, we think about community and it's often described as a group of people that have and share common interests, ideas, and boundaries. But when you think about the work of your organization, how do you put that into operation? How do we operationalize what we define as community and then take that back? And you talked about the Brown School and you talked about the work at WashU, but how do we operationalize that? How do we do what we do in our workplaces to strengthen the communities where we live, work, and play? Because often, many of us go into a workplace that may not be in our physical community. And then we go back into that physical community and we have to make change, we have to make differences. So my question is, how do we take this concept of community and then leverage that to strengthen and what we need in terms of how we work, live, and play? So I'm gonna start with you, Mary. And by the way, here's what I said to these three. I said, I could just throw out one question and we could talk all day, right? So it's really, so we could go from there, but this concept of community and how do we, again, what it means, sometimes we just think of a physical community, but leaving that community and going and making a difference. What do we do? How do we strengthen it?
Okay, so Susan, I'm an academic, so I could give you a lecture on the definition of communities if you want. I'm not going to do that. The audience says Hugh. But this is how I kind of think about community in relation to our work at the university. So communities are made up of human beings that you can knit together based on a common mission, a common set of goals, a common set of values, right? So as I think about organizing our university community inside for success, simultaneously, I'm organizing St. Louis citizens to really bring their best selves, not only to their job, but bring those skills, those values, those commitments to their neighborhoods, to their school boards, to the life of their community. So I am in a fortunate position in that as we enhance the lives of people within the university, open up access, we also have the possibility of making a positive difference in our community. If I think about impact, we have dichotomized people's selves. So they put on one self as they go to their workplace.
Yes.
And theoretically, they are a different self when they leave. And true integration, if you're going to make a real difference, that authentic self has to show up and be supported in all of those places. And so I think that those are at least how I'm thinking about the humans and their role in the strategic plan, but also the humans and their role of leading their community. And there's the same people. So let's bring them together and empower and support them to make change in all aspects of their life.
Oh my gosh, what you just said. So remember, so for those of you who are wondering why I have on a t-shirt that says Power of She, we're actually hosting an event right now at the same time with about 3,100 of our employees, which is a women's history event that we're doing. So that's why I have this on. But one of the panels that's happening right now is on imposter syndrome. And it's about who we are and sometimes who we are in our workplace and who we are at home. And so I find what you just said to be so relevant. But then I think about what you said, how do we make an impact? We have to make an impact by being authentic, by doing what we do inside our workplace and also taking that outside our workplace. I often say I can't be one person inside Cigna and someone else outside of Cigna. I am the same person. So Michellene, I saw you shaking your head when Mary was talking. So can you kind of go with what she was talking about as well? What's your thoughts there?
First of all, I find myself traditionally shaking my head when Mary is talking because Mary is traditionally right? So it is an involuntary muscular reaction to it. Absolutely. I loved that so very much because of the fact that I suppose one of the things that I look at and as I define community as well is really around that sense of a feeling of fellowship with others as a result of sharing some common beliefs or attitudes or interests. So i.e. we think the scientific community, we think the religious community, we think the Black community or trans community or other community. And so, as I listen to that, it's such an interesting opportunity for us to really be truly inclusive to a sense of actually finally creating the environment where belonging can thrive, right? When you invite those folks to bring themselves in all of their different communities, all of their different interests, et cetera, to the table. And so I really find that is just, I just love so much what she was saying because of the fact that it leaves nothing, right, at the door. It makes certain that the whole person, the dichotomy of the whole person is welcomed into the room and that there is made space at the table for their voice, right? And I think that it's really interesting how often we have historically just sort of prevented folks from doing that in a lot of environments, and how wonderful it is that we're now in a phase and a stage that we're really trying to be quite intentional about making certain that we're welcoming everyone and all of that. And so when I think about, so how can we be truly impactful? I think about the opportunity to speak to that with intentionality, right? So that when I enter a room, I don't have to choose between being Black and female, right? I don't have to decide between being a manager or a president and CEO or a caregiver to my ailing elderly mother.
Yes.
Right? That all of that lived experience is welcome into this environment. And I think that is something that in and of itself, as long as we are creating an opportunity to really be intentional and verbal about that we are literally making that impact, Susan, as we are permitting others to do the same, right? To quote Marianne Williamson, right? That when we show up in all of that great gloriousness, that is our compound, complex structure, that is our humanness, our humanity, our human selves. That in and of this, the fact that when I come into the room and I'm tired because my mother's Alzheimer's, the sundowners is something else, right? But when I actually make room for that and add a space for that I am inadvertently doing so for others, so that the single parent father who has been up all night with his sick child is able to speak to that as well, right? And making sure that it's an environment that doesn't shy away from, but actually is inclusive of that lived experience too. So I feel like that's remarkably impactful.
So I want you all to put a pin on something, and I want you to think about, we're in different stages of our career. Forrest, I'm going to come to you. We're in different stages of our career. I can walk into a room with intentionality and be my whole self because I'm in a totally different stage in my career than my 27-year-old daughter, who may not feel that she has either the confidence, the support, the whatever to do that, and may not feel she has that voice. So I want to keep that pin on that about, when do we have our voice? When do we get to leverage our voice? And oh, by the way, do we need other voices to help us? So Forrest, I threw a whole lot out there. Kind of go back to my first question, right?
Yeah.
About what's community and what are you doing at Inroads? But then I want you to talk about voices.
Okay.
And when do I have my voice versus when do I need your voice to help me?
Yeah. Well, listen, I think I give kudos to the two ladies that talked about this impact piece, but the community design for us, it's embedded in the DNA. We do our training program with the Inroads students. Each year, when our students participate, they must turn in 100 hours of community service. So our definition of community is truly built around how you value the community that you're from. And we define it by partnering with organizations, what we call communities of action. Those organizations that take action and not talk when it comes to helping the community sustain itself. So each student, each year, has to spend 100 hours volunteering on a community project. Absolutely. High school and college. Why? Because it's all about sustaining our communities. They care, but if they learn at an early age, guess what? They'll tend to do more even when they get older. It never changes. You go back to your hometown, what do you look around? Oh boy, that building is no longer there. Oh boy, whatever happened to the swing set? Oh boy, boy, that playground I used to do, where are they now? It's a certain commonality amongst us. So we want our students to know this through community service. So this year, we're focused on sustainability of our community. So the student has to go out and volunteer. What can you bring a solution to or volunteer for around community sustainability, that playground, that other source? So that's what community is for us, is getting it in the mindsets of the young students what their role is about community service. It's a lost art, but now we have a chance to get back out there. When it comes to that voice piece, we've all heard about inclusion. And Susan, your team has done the example in this. Each year when you do your DEI conference in the fall, you actually include the college students and the high school students right next door between Express Scripts and others to be a part of the actual panels and to be a part of the audience. And so what voice means to me is to ensure we include the young people in our problem solving in all kinds of complex problems.
I agree.
I promise you, they're brilliant. They'll bring ideas that will be disruptive and shake our core ground. But I tell you what, there's some great ideas. They really, really have some great ideas. So I just think that voice has to include our young people at the table when we're talking about problem solving.
100% agree. And I think that, again, what I said, we're all in various stages of our careers, right? So how do we ensure, and I know that the Brown School does it. In fact, we have some of the fellows here who are giving and lending their voices. But, you know, as I think about, again, that whole conversation, that whole piece about voice being in certain parts of your career and life stage, you know, Michellene, you talked about life stages where we are. So I would love to hear from you as well as Mary about this concept of voice. How do you not only use your voice, but sometimes use the voices around you to help get your message across? So Mary, anything you want to add there?
Well, I just wanted to, you know, this is a panel that clearly I agree with. I feel like it's almost, Michellene, when you said, you know, are using our voice, it's almost our responsibility. If we are going to transform the cultures within which we live and work and play and celebrate, we have to model that voice. Because you're right, Susan, I am in a different place in my career. And I need to unleash, Forrest, your students earlier and earlier so that they feel freer to contribute and educate me, who is of a different generation. And so I feel like it's really, you know, we are, by who we are and what we bring, and intentionally setting the kind of commitments. Michellene, you use the word intentionality. I think that's how we're trying to shift the communities and the structures. And it's really important to me, given your t-shirt, you know, your she t-shirt, Susan.
Yeah.
I'm of a generation of women. There's not as many women still at this level in higher ed.
Yes.
And certainly, you know, I raised 5 children as a mother in the academy, that all of that has to be talked about explicitly, because there was a lot of denying of caregiving and the responsibilities how that would impact a career, and making room for those authentic stories. So thank you for raising that.
No, I love what you said too, because I think, and you didn't say the word, but I can say it for myself, there's a little bit of guilt associated with, as I'm building my career, did I do what I needed to do for my children at the time that they needed it? And so you think about, and that works in the work environment as well. So did I give them their voices? I hope I did. You know, they seem to be highly functioning adults, so I hope I did what I was supposed to do, but it's real. And I think that many of us struggle with that, male or female, as we're building and launching our careers. And it's about making sure. So I always say I wanted to have a voice so that I made your voice stronger, right? So putting my voice out there made your voice stronger. And that's what my job was and should be. So Michellene, what's your thoughts on some of the things that we've been talking about?
Well, essentially, I could just say ditto. I think so much that it is an actual aspect of our responsibility as a result of the fact that we are at places in our careers where we get an opportunity to do some things very differently, right? At the introduction that you were kind enough to permit each panelist to make, I was able to share just a little bit about my career history. And so truth be told, at this stage, now serving as a president and CEO of a national foundation, which has global footprint, I mean, you know, the sense of sensitivity is, you know, if you walk into the room a little bit late, no one's going to turn and give you the eyebrow, right? Right. I mean, I was just a treasurer and the CEO of the lottery. They just wanted to make certain I had a big check in my pocket with their name on it. So at some point, one of the reasons why I talk about showing up in our authenticity is in order to afford and to act as ally to those who, quite frankly, are not at that stage in their career as of yet. Right. And so that new 27-year-old, right, newlywed with the new baby, almost had a fresh baby, with the new baby, is not going to want to evidence any element of weakness because she's concerned about making certain that she's right viable for promotion. And so she's never going to say that. But I can walk in and say my 82-year-old mother decided that she wanted ice cream 3 o'clock in the morning. And so I've been up since 3 and really make space for those others. I agree with Mary wholeheartedly, which I know is shocking, about the fact that, right, it is our responsibility to do so. And Susan, I've not had the distinct pleasure and opportunity of being a mother myself. Instead, I have 9 godchildren. Yes, I'm a sucker. And I'm the one who just shows up and makes it, right? I write big checks to Space Camp, right? Yeah. And wherever else, that's really, but I fly in for school plays and just everything else. So I'm very, very involved in that regard. And what I will tell you is one of the most important elements that I have watched the parents of these children do is to make certain that they actually develop their voice. So when you talked about that, you know, I see that I absolutely understand the importance as a mother, but I will tell you as a mentor,
yes,
it is so incredibly important that we foster our mentoring, sponsorship, and coaching relationships to make certain that individuals both own their voice, right? But also know when it's best for them to exercise that.
absolutely.
Right. And so too often, too many young people in corporate America who actually look like me or in and of a background that is similar to mine wind up finding themselves a first and an only. So in hindsight, when I look back, I want to make certain that I was the first woman to be an executive vice president in that entity's 152-year history. Did I, in fact, once that door was open, hold that door open in order to get more women, right? And so I literally did not leave until that was the case. Formed a women's resource group, etc. And so there's a magic to ensuring that in all of our different facets that we are in life, right? That we are making certain that others feel that they have a voice, and then we are holding the space open to make certain that they get to put that voice on the table. We're not beginning that meeting until we look around and realize that every diversity, right, aspect is actually included at that room. We're not ending the meeting until we hear something from everyone's voice that is at that table. So these are really important elements which are fundamental, right? But they really go a very long way. They're not rocket science, right? They're human science.
All right.
I
Hey,
love
Susan,
so much.
I was-
Yeah, Forrest, go ahead, because I was thinking
I was
about
gonna
something.
I'm going to give a microphone to both these ladies and say the way to get that done, we practice something at Inroads every meeting. At the end of every meeting, I started out, I just go, no matter what the agenda is, I ask everybody in the room, tell me something I don't know. It automatically gives permission that the voice is in the room. So just try it the next time you have a meeting. At the end, leave 5 minutes and just say, hey, listen, tell me something I don't know. First meeting, it'll be a little slow. 1 or 2 people will say, did you know I just got my certificate of X? The next meeting, 5 people will join in. They'll tell you something you don't know. It automatically puts the voice in the room, particularly on tough topics. Thought I'd share that with you on a practice.
So, you know, it's so interesting. Again, I told you we could just go all day, right? So what we're dealing with, remember how I started, the tension, the stress, it's complex. Let's be honest, the world that we're living in, we can say the word unprecedented, an unprecedented number of times. It is unprecedented. The world we're living in is complex. But how do we make the complex simple? How do we take how do we go from theory to application? Which was my kids were like, okay, Mom, if you say this another time, it is, so sometimes it would be about theory, but now I'm going to apply it. I'm going to show you what it looks like. And that's what we have to do in our workplaces. So the question is really around, how do we do that? We've talked, you know, all of us have done what we call courageous conversations, inspiring, inclusive conversations. But how do we continue with that? And many of those conversations started 2 years ago after George Floyd. And so workplaces are having them, but I don't want it to go away. I don't want it to be, oh, I'm checking the box. We have an inspiring, inclusive conversation. What do we need to do to continue that dialogue? And what else do we need to do? right? How do we make the complex simple for our employees, for our communities, for those around us? Does that make sense, guys? So who wants to go first? Forrest, first person I see on my screen.
Well, the first thing I thought of, and it's so important, the issues are complex. They're sensitive. They are engaging, intriguing, they're divisive, all those above. So to continue the courageous conversations, I believe we must not forget that we must make the complex more simple. And I liken it around health literacy. We just took America through, the nation, the world, through a pandemic, but we find ourselves using terms that are so big, and I know Michellene will agree with me on this, that we forget that literally literacy is a challenge. So when we talk about health literacy or financial literacy or anything on top of that literacy, we don't make it easy for people to have a conversation. So what my thinking is around is how we keep the conversation really going is to really make it simple to talk about. Hey, it's been 3 years, it'll be 3 years in May, since the unfortunate death of George Floyd. How are you doing? Simple. To make it, what do you think of the issue? And how do you think they covered it on CNN and MEMs and whatever? Just go right at it. How are you doing? How are you feeling? And have the opportunity to have those discussions in a safe environment inside the walls of the company. But I got one more. Take it to the community.
Yeah.
Corporate America can lead these conversations by keeping them simple and tap into the community more often for town hall meetings and say, we're here to have a conversation about what? How are we doing? How are we doing? Open up the doors. And I love the concept around open classrooms. I love it because it is exactly that, opening up to the community. So I just say the two things would be, let's keep this simple and take the conversations to the community. Corporate America can do this if we continue.
Perfect.
This is my thought.
No, I love it. And so Mary, this actually was supposed to be your question as well, right? So what can we do to further champion diversity, equity, and inclusion? So what would you say there too?
Yeah, so I have so many, thoughts. So I'm going to try to make at least a couple of related points. The first is that if you're going to create an inclusive kind of culture, I'm thinking about this in our strategic plan. How do I help every human being find their place in this plan? Find the ways that they can uniquely contribute, benefit, and that means that I have to really think about the whole range of diversity of those sub-communities within my larger community, right? So how do I open doors in collaboration with so many others to find your place? But I want to go back to Forrest. You did a really terrific job about how is it that we are going to relate human to human and check in with each other, and to really be able to open a door around human painful topics. So in some ways it might be simple. How are you doing was Forrest's, your simple question, but it's not simple because the answer is not simple. Sometimes it's painful. So it really is a combination of kind of having both courage to open doors that can be painful, being able to have enough skill, because I actually don't think that this is, I don't want you to drive a car without knowing how to drive a car. Don't open a door until you also can receive information that's authentic, right? And so I think that it's about really having courage, but also investing in a set of relational skills and tools and abilities to help people really express themselves. And so it's I don't know, it's Forrest, I believe you when you say it's simple, but I also think there's a lot of work that we have to do because we're not made yet to address these simple things. Yeah.
So, one of the things that I would equate that to, I tell people all the time, we do not know everything there is to know about diversity. And they look at me like, oh my gosh, you're a diversity practitioner, you're supposed to know that. I said, that's like assuming I know everything about the internet and I'm going to get to the end of the internet. I never will get there. It is changing every single day. So when you think about what you just said, Mary, we cannot know everything. So how do you continue to open yourselves up to learning? And even as a practitioner, I still learn every single day, especially when it comes to the new world that we're living in. I have to ask questions. And I think, I was looking at you, Michellene, I think that I love the fact that you have 9 godchildren. You can have 2 more. Their names are Alex and Clark. But I often think that we tell children when they're children, don't be afraid to ask questions. But as adults, we are fearful of looking as if we don't know something. So therefore we don't ask the question. I mean, kind of talk to me a little bit about what's the next step? What's the next iteration? What do we need to continue to do to move this forward?
I love that you're asking these questions in exactly this format because you're doing 2 things. One, acknowledging the fact that it is in fact an equity journey, right? That where every stop along that path is actually so all important, and that there's no ultimate, right? There's no Walt Disneyland in DEI, and so right, you're not just trying to arrive, and 2, evidencing the fact that it's forward moving. Right, that it's always evolving, and so I love that by the very essence of your questions. I really think that what is a key component of any equity journey, either a corporate, right, either personal or professional, is to really begin with the self, with the person, right? A lot of entities that I talk to want to talk about everything that's out there that they can do, right? How do we end racism in the country? And I'm like, well, I don't know. How are you ending it in your own procedures and practices and processes and protocols, right? And so as a result of that, but the very first step of that is even making certain that we begin with the human being, with the acknowledgement of the fact that we all come to wherever we are at this point in our lives from and through different lived experiences, right? Different orientations, that the lens through which we see the world is a kaleidoscope. That kaleidoscope is shaded and colored by everything from with whom you grew up and how, to whom you did not grow up with, right? And who you were told to stay away from, and who you lock your doors when they walk by, right? And so all of these things color, of course, how we envision the world. And as a result of that, I really just want to make certain that anyone who is attempting to do anything like this, that you really begin with that self-assessment, right? And think about, so what has really made up my dichotomy of thought? How do I come about what I value and why, right? What's led me to this list of values and commitments in my life? And how do I express that? Do my values show up in my everyday decision-making and behavior, right? Because I can say I value equity, but then never ensure that there's a diverse candidacy pool before me.
Absolutely.
Right? Or quite frankly, have some chagrin when my daughter brings home a playmate who is trans. I'm just being completely right. And so as a result of that, we just want to make certain that we revisit all of these things in what we're doing. And I think that the second element to that is really making certain that we marry what we call, for those of us in the law, marry the facts to the law, right? Marry what we value to what it is we do, right? And so if we have corporate norms, if we have corporate values, right? Make certain that we are marrying those facts to the law of what we do on a daily basis, right? So how am I living this out? Is this something that is evident in my file, in every clinical, operational, administrative decision that I am making? Are those values showing up? And so in reference to how to keep the conversation going, one of the worst things about the society in which we have all signed our social contract and shown up here is the fact that we have been told not to talk about politics and religion. And so what we learned really well was not to talk about politics or religion. And so, right, and race is an element in both of those things, right? And so we learned really well how to avoid these really tough, courageous conversations, but we all want to be people of courage. Isn't that funny?
But it's so true. And then remember how I said a minute ago, these conversations that we're having, we may not have had 5 years ago, 10 years ago. When I started my career a long time ago, these were not conversations that we would have had in our workplace. You cannot separate today. I cannot have a conversation about orientation, gender or sexual orientation without having, unfortunately, sometimes a conversation about religion. It is going to, they're tied together. And so, or a conversation about healthcare. I cannot have a conversation about healthcare without having a conversation about education and without having a conversation about community or social determinants of health and how that impacts us. And so we have to be realistic. And by the way, it is our responsibility, I think you all three said it, to learn, to engage, to ask those questions and be responsible citizens, humans in the work that we do. Forrest, I see you. You're chomping at the bit. You want to say something? I'm going to let you talk. What is it?
Well, if I had to add one more thing, it would be that don't get away from digging into the disparities. So this adds to it, Mary, about keeping it simple. Even though we announce all these numbers and disparities, whether it's equity on positions in corporate America, whether it's equity, the lack of equity in the delivery of healthcare, there's a way we can find how to make those facts simplistic, right? Get down to the community level and really lean and say, did you know that every African-American male has 1 in an X timed chances of getting colon cancer? Got it? Why do we want them to know that? Because we want action. And there's a disparity versus their white male, not because we're trying to compete, but I just think we ought to continue to dig deep in the disparities and simplify them, Mary, to your point. So that one item there will not only keep it on the front end of the burner, it'll also keep voice and make sure that we're helping people understand how they can voice out through digging through disparities.
What you said, so Michellene, I'm going to turn this back over to you because think about what you do and what he just said from that stat. African-American men are 1.5 times more likely to develop colon cancer. So what's one thing that we could do in order, because African-American men also don't go to the doctor or don't have primary care physicians. And why is that, Michellene? What do we need?
Yeah, so I always like to say that we need two things: a deep dive into education, and then secondly, we need a sincere apology. And the truth be told, right? Members of the African American and other persons of color communities have literally developed a well-earned level of distrust from the medical profession, and it is because of the fact that marginalized communities, or strike that, communities that have been marginalized by society, literally have been the victims of exploitation and forced experimentation and forced sterilization. And so whenever someone starts talking about healthcare disparities, they like to bring up the Tuskegee experiment, right? Which was the situation of not providing medication to African-American men in the South, although they were told they were receiving medication in order to help protect them from syphilis. The truth be told, that is not the sole situation.
No.
And so we look at the fact, I'm like, up until 1978, we still had forced sterilization of Black women in North Carolina. Let's not be crazy here, and Philadelphia. I mean, truth be told, right? Even as we saw the COVID vaccine being developed, there was some experimentation on prisoners, right? And so the special needs population, the DDD population, the prisoner population, et cetera, we know that this has happened. And so I really need for medicine to begin to act as if it has happened, and to be able to apologize in real time to the fact of things like Henrietta Lack's family, right? The HLA gene, they still have never received monetary compensation. Hello, somebody. And so when we talk about this, what we really need to do is to make certain that we act as if on a daily basis in our bedside care and in our administrative policies, we need to act as if these things have happened. Because I will tell you that when people come into your doors as a healthcare entity, they sure enough have it on their mind. That aspect of distrust or mistrust is front and center. And so
distrust and that mistrust is leading to continued health issues in communities. And so we have that. I didn't want to cut you off, but I think that's the important phase and the point
Correct.
that we need to address, that how do we mitigate that
Yes.
mistrust? How do we mitigate that negative connotation that people have about healthcare, when in reality, improvements in healthcare will improve your life expectancy, right? So how do we, how are we making sure that you're accessing what is available? So Mary, I see you shaking your head.
I just want to, you know, not only agree with Michellene, but I want to broaden this just a little bit, because, you know, if I don't work in healthcare, then it seems like Michellene just said, well, doctors have to fix this. We work for institutions.
That's right.
That have let people of color down, that have marginalized groups of people, that have systemically kept people in, kept people out, right? And so regardless of the institution, there is almost like a need for universal recognition of the complex history and the hurt
Yes.
and the burden that they have caused. And unless you recognize that, I don't know how you move forward, right? Because otherwise you're standing on ground that just doesn't, you know, isn't solid underneath your feet, right? And that's what I think you meant about the apology needed, the acknowledgement, the recognition. And if you work in healthcare, that took on, boy, you were amazing around all the examples, right, Michellene? But our institutions equally have pretty long lists of very specific examples. And so I think that's another, I hadn't thought of it. See, I learn every moment that's another responsibility of me as a leader, is to lead with that acknowledgement and that apology. So yeah. Thank
And
you.
that humility, Mary, and that humility, which is something that you do very well, right? It's something that you do very well. It literally requires us to enter into these spaces with a true depth of humility that, quite frankly, medicine has not been known for, sorry to say, right?
No.
But there's a reason why EDS and meds, right, acknowledge the fact that they are anchor institutions. Because we have the ability, large-scale academic medical centers, large-scale academic centers, right, education, corporations, we have the ability to shift the local economies in the areas where we are located. And so when we decide to utilize our place-based presence, not to proliferate poverty, right, but to instead, to ensure that we are hiring locally, investing locally, living locally, right? When we decide that we're going to be a good neighbor and address the social determinants / political determinants of health in the communities in which we are located, we are already actually impacting what Dr. Aiton said, right? Who said that your genetic code has a larger, that your zip code has a larger impact on your lifespan than your genetic code.
Yes, yes.
Right? We have the ability to do that in corporations, in higher ed, in medicine. And then of course, you could always, be a person who understands that National Medical Fellowships make certain that we eliminate healthcare disparities by pushing out more BIPOC underrepresented in medicine.
I was waiting for you to get to that. I was like, you got to put that part out there, right? You absolutely do.
It's always coming.
That's why the three of you are on this panel, right? So it's EDS and meds. You have to, Forrest, I want to come back to this question early. I think you talked about wealth disparity. And so let's talk about that, because Michellene, you touched on it a little bit, but there's so much that in what all three of you have said. And so I think that, yesterday, that Biden signed the law, the Emmett Till, right? It's acknowledgement of past mistakes in communities. You have to acknowledge it. And so that was from 1955. Somebody do the math for me, but how many years later is this law that had actually come up a couple of times has now been signed? I think that acknowledgement is so important, because that's how you move forward. We have to acknowledge the mistake in order to not make the mistake again. And I think that that's what we saw yesterday. So with that, Forrest, as I think about community, and there's this other piece around what is collective impact, right? And it's all of us coming together to solve the complex, right? We may have different ways of doing it, but how do we solve the complex? But then the bigger question is, how do you solve the complex that's associated with wealth gap disparity, the reality of what we're seeing in the world?
Well, first of all, the acknowledgement. let's just double down on it, right? The acknowledgement is the data is already done. We don't even have to study another economic report that says that Blacks have a gap and Hispanics have a gap between the wealth in this nation and those who have opportunities for wealth. And part of it is that at the end of a career for an African-American, the data is there for the St. Louis Fed Reserve that says that the average African-American will end up with about $17,000 in net worth in this nation, and the average white family, $171,000. So when we look at those kinds of definitive gaps, according to Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan Chase, says that it would take over 200 years to close that gap, and a lot of money. But what we're seeing there are some actual movement when communities work together. So if Susan comes out of middle school and she's going into high school, all the nonprofits and the companies in the community should be interested in Susan getting to the upper middle class, regardless where she started from. So what we've seen is when there's a collective action, and then we just saw one that we witnessed, the Southern Company, one of the fifth largest energy companies, got together and said they wanted to see how they could sustain talent coming out of HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. So they asked us, could we organize this collective community action? We did. So Inroads, Thurgood Marshall, College Fund, and UNCF have gotten together to focus on the sustainability of historically Black colleges in 4 different states. Why? Because what comes off of that is how we build wealth, entrepreneurials and also corporate. Did you know that 80% of Black judges in the country come from a historically Black college? And there are only 101 of them, okay? So when we see that, this evidence is already there. So what we need to think about is that collective action of private sector, public sector, higher ed, working together collectively to ensure we scale Susan time 10. Okay, Susan, I hate to put a number on you, but scale Susan time 10, all 3 institutions have to work together. And so that's what I really believe, that we can do this. And we saw it in the Inroads data recently. We look back at 20 years of Inroads students coming through Inroads. We took 1,000 Inroads alum and we took 1,000 white executives and compared their net worth, net asset, and home ownership rate. The data, not only validated by Wealth Engine and the St. Louis Federal Reserve, showed that the Inroads alum had 40% of them had a higher net worth than their white counterpart.
Wow.
Net assets, 47%. Home ownership rate, over 12% higher than a white counterpart. It's not magic. It's about the community working together. So from Express Scripts to everybody else helping out Susan, guess what? So did WashU. Guess what? So did Morehouse. So did everybody in that community help Susan. We need 10 times more Susans in the country today. So that's what I mean about closing that wealth gap through collective communities working together.
I love it. I love it. And again, it's showing on the screen today of, I'm connecting the dots here, and I'm connecting Inroads to WashU to NMF and saying, if we followed that progression, how that progression right there, and then do that 10 times and then take that another, right? Extrapolate that even more. That's how you do it. So Mary, I can see, right? What do you,
Well,
you want to say something?
I just think what Forrest said, there's some elements there that are you just speak about it, Forrest, and you take it for granted. Your laser focused attention on the example of Susan in middle school, right? That it is, where there's disproportionate burden, there's also disproportionate attention and resource and support. Right. And in this world where we get very confused between equality and equity, right? That Forrest is this example of like an equity focused intervention. that it is possible in one generation to eliminate these disparities. But it requires very laser focused attention and being very comfortable with disproportionate attention when there's been blocks and burden and harm. And I just think that is important, because you can get very confused in this institution. Are you intervening for all, or are you really also trying to kind of eradicate and address the harm that's been done, right? And so I think that it gets hard for leaders, because there's a lot of voices in your head about how you're supposed to, what you're supposed to pay attention to. And inclusion can look complicated based on what Forrest was saying. And so I'm learning a lot from the both of you. So Susan, bring us together again, because I'm benefiting.
I love it. I love it. But it's so true. And I think that's why we started with the voices, right? Your voice versus the voice around you. Michellene, I want you to jump in, and I have to, oh my goodness, it's 1:27. We actually have 3 minutes. So Michellene, I'm going to let you answer the question that jump into the conversation we're just having, and then I'm going to turn it back to you all for parting words. Forrest, I'm going to use what you said. What is it? Tell me something I don't know. So that's how I'm going to end. I want each of you to tell me something I don't know. But before I do that, I want to turn it back over to Michellene. And by the way, Mary, Janet, team, we need to bring this group back, right? This is a longer conversation. So Janet, open classroom. All right, Michellene.
I just love what my colleagues have said on here today. And, I love when Forrest started throwing out his percentages, because 70% of all physicians and clinicians who are Black in this country come from HBCUs, right? And so to Mary's exact point, yes, we do. We need to have a stagnated laser focus on ensuring that we are addressing equity, right? And equity is not equality. Right? It is not let us do everything for everybody. It is let us do this in a manner that acknowledges the groups that have been disenfranchised historically, right? Because of the fact that the average medical education is literally upwards of $66,000, and many of the white counterparts of our scholars receive financial support from their families, but the fact that the families of our scholars on average have a household income of $45,000, the majority of them are graduating with upwards of $300,000 in debt. NMF is trying to change that by closing that wealth gap and ensuring that we have a pipeline that helps us to eliminate these disparities. This has been great.
I love it. So Janet, I apologize that we didn't get to any of the questions, but hopefully we have addressed a lot of it today. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Forrest. Tell me something I don't know.
Something you don't know. We didn't help scale Susan time 10. We're working on it. We still got another couple more years, but we did scale someone, and that is one of only 2 African-American females in the country of a Fortune 100 companies came through the Inroads program. Her name is Thasunda Duckett. She's the CEO of TIAA.
Well, I didn't, you know what? I thought I knew a lot about Inroads. I didn't know that. So thank you. All right, I'll be tapping on you to bring her in. So Michellene, gonna tell me something I don't know.
Well, I'm not sure that everyone knows that today happens to be National Doctors Day. And so as we salute doctors everywhere who continue to stand on the front line, we also acknowledge those who were the very first from particular communities of color and women as well. And so I would like to say happy Doctors Day to everyone.
Thank you. And Dr. McKay, I had to put that in there. You're the Vice Provost. You have done phenomenal work. I've been working with you for many years. And so please tell me something I don't know.
I will bring my human self to end this program. I had no idea as I was growing up what a vice provost was, that existed. And many of us find ourselves in these positions where we are off a map, but that map is powerful. And so, so if you are out in the audience thinking that this doesn't apply to you, that you all work for a platform that could make a difference, you can organize your collective to make an impact. And if you feel like you're off the map, I bet all four of us are off the map that we could dream earlier on in our careers. So thank you, Susan. You are an amazing, amazing friend, colleague, inspiration to us all. Thank you for bringing us together.
Thank you. So thank you. With that, we're closing out our program. I'm going to ask the panelists to stay on, but Janet, I think we're finished.